For more than 2,000 years, the world believed that Petra was merely a triumph of human ingenuity, a rose-red city carved into the rock and admired by millions. But this story was always incomplete. In 2024, something that should never have been disturbed was finally opened. Deep within Petra, exactly below its most famous monument, the Treasury, archaeologists accessed a space that had been deliberately sealed. It was not a lost tunnel, nor a common extension. It was a chamber built with a single purpose, never to be reopened. 3 layers of ceiling, stone upon stone, as if someone were not trying to protect a treasure, but to trap something, or someone, inside. What was found was not gold, nor jewels. It was evidence of a fear so deep that science still cannot explain it. Marks of despair on the walls, human remains in disturbing positions, and a secret that, after 2 millennia of silence, began to breathe again. Why would an entire civilization be so terrified of letting something escape? What are the official reports trying to soften? And why do some members of the excavation team refuse to return to the site? Prepare yourself. Today, we are going to descend into the darkness beneath the treasury of Petra to reveal the truth that was buried to be forgotten. To reach the most emblematic construction of Petra, known as the Treasury, it is necessary to cross the gorge called Seek. This corridor features high rocky walls that draw close together, extending for approximately 1,000 meters. At the end of this trail, the Treasury emerges abruptly before one's eyes. The gorge expands, revealing this canyon, offering an extraordinary perspective. Considered one of the most recognized and impressive panoramas on the planet, the structure possesses imposing dimensions and is ornamented with pillars and sculptural details that harken back to royal residences. Countless visitors experiencing the site for the first time demonstrate admiration for the exactness and sophistication with which this monument was manually sculpted in ancient times. Throughout generations, local populations maintained the belief that the treasury transcended its function as a grave or sanctuary. A widely spread narrative maintained that it harbored hidden riches belonging to an Egyptian ruler. Such a conception derived from the large decorative carved piece positioned at the highest point of the external facade of the treasury, which many supposed contained precious metals. According to historical documents, even today it is possible to observe signs of gunshots on the urn, left by individuals who tried to force its opening. Local Bedouin tribes transmitted through generations stories about the treasury that went beyond the search for gold. They spoke of nights in which strange sounds echoed from the interior of the structure, muffled groans that seemed to come from the depths of the rock. Elders warned travelers not to approach after nightfall, when the shadows lengthened and the wind carried incomprehensible whispers. These narratives were discarded as superstition for decades. However, after the discovery of the sealed chamber, some researchers began to reconsider whether these stories did not contain fragments of collective memory, distorted echoes of real events that the Nabateans tried to erase from history. Archaeology specialists, however, did not locate material riches at the site. They argue that the true purpose of the treasury remains undefined. Certain researchers maintain that it served as a royal mausoleum. Other specialists consider that it performed a ceremonial function, while some propose that it may have fulfilled diverse functions throughout different eras. The Nabateans shaped hundreds of other edifices excavated in the rocky formations of the precipices of Petra. The vast majority constitute burials. For this reason, specialists frequently characterize Petra as a necropolis. The mortuary spaces are found distributed throughout the valley, however. Even considering all of them, the treasury remains incomparable. It presents larger proportions, more elaborate decoration, and a strategic location at the entrance of the metropolis. This configuration leads investigators to consider that it played a prominent role. Considering that Petra already represented a city of sepulchres, then the hypothesis that its most grandiose monument could also hide funerary chambers below its structure became more plausible. The vast majority of tourists visit Petra and record photographic images of the treasury, leaving without questioning what might be hidden under the surface. However, throughout decades, archaeologists maintained suspicions that the site could contain elements beyond the visible ones. Some residents of the region allege that Petra houses sealed compartments and empty spaces hidden in the interior of the rocky formations. According to testimonies, even the sound produced by striking certain points near the Treasury produces a characteristic reverberation of cavities, suggesting that something is buried in the depths. Other narratives indicate that people avoided certain areas of the front courtyard during the nighttime period, considering them dangerous. A local guide named Mahmoud, whose family has lived in the region for 14 generations, reported to the archaeological team something disturbing. His great-grandfather had told of a curse associated with a specific area of the courtyard, exactly where the scans would identify the anomaly decades later. According to the family history, anyone who dug in that location would be visited by nightmares of faces screaming in the darkness. The family kept this oral tradition alive, even without knowing its origin. When the archaeologists showed Mahmoud the map of the scans, he turned pale. His family's cursed zone coincided perfectly with the location of the sealed chamber. Coincidence? Or ancestral memory preserved through generations? These narratives never received scientific confirmation, however they kept the enigma active for years. The archaeologists could only speculate about what existed below without possessing methods to validate their hypotheses. For this reason, the eventual discovery of a sealed space under the Treasury surprised numerous specialists. For the first time in modern history, evidence indicated that Petra still preserved secrets that no contemporary researcher had revealed. The notion of a sealed chamber generated urgent questions. What was the reason for the seal? What elements did the Nabateans intend to hide? Was it a sepulchre for members of royalty? A sacred crypt? Or something of a disturbing nature that should never be accessed? Before these inquiries could begin to receive answers, the archaeologists needed to overcome the greatest challenge of all, obtaining authorization to perform excavations below the Treasury, a permission that historically no one had obtained. The zone in front of the Treasury, called the front courtyard, was considered a sacred and untouchable area. This was the location where thousands of visitors positioned themselves daily. It represented the space where tour guides narrated stories, where photographs were captured, and where people formed their first lasting impression of Petra. Interfering with that soil was considered extremely dangerous and delicate from a political point of view. For many years, the response directed to the archaeologists remained invariable. No excavating intervention would ever be authorized in that space. This did not discourage the archaeologists from persisting. Teams presented proposals repeatedly, aiming for their methodologies to convince the competent authorities. However, those responsible determined that the dangers outweighed the potential benefits. The concern was evident. Should the Treasury suffer any type of damage, Jordan would lose simultaneously a national heritage and one of its main sources of tourism revenue. According to historical records, archaeologists exerted pressure for decades without obtaining success. They argued that technological progress made it possible for the excavation to be executed safely. They promised meticulous documentation and minimal interference at the site. However, the refusal always returned. The Treasury was too valuable to be touched. However, during 2024, something finally transformed. After years of discussions, the Department of Antiquities of Jordan granted approval for a limited excavating intervention under some of the most rigorous conditions ever established for an archaeological excavation. The determination was not made superficially. The authorities made it explicit that the project was not about a search for riches. It was fundamentally scientific research, and every action should preserve the integrity of the monument. The rules were precise and inflexible. Each trench had to be reversible. This meant that, after the conclusion of the work, the terrain could be restored as if no interference had occurred. Each procedure had to be supervised and documented minutely. Every particle of soil had to be recorded before its removal. The project was planned to resemble more a surgical procedure than a conventional excavation. A coalition of organizations was established to execute the work. The Petra Development and Tourism Region Authority supervised the site's role as a tourist destination. The Petra National Trust provided specialized local knowledge and ensured that community interests were respected. The American Center of Research granted the excavation its logistical support and established credibility in Jordan. The University of St. Andrews contributed advanced scanning and dating technologies. Each organization contributed distinct elements, and collectively they built the type of trust necessary to manage such a delicate project. Even with all these precautions implemented, anxiety persisted. Some specialists feared that even one small error of calculation could cause the emergence of cracks in the Treasury. Some local residents whispered that the Nabateans had sealed certain locations for a specific reason, and that disturbing them could lead to unpredictable consequences. Regardless of whether these concerns were grounded in science or superstition, they weighed considerably on the team. Before any excavation could begin, the team needed to discover what existed under the Treasury without touching it physically. Excavating blindly did not represent a viable option. They resorted to non-invasive tools capable of scanning below the surface. Confronted simultaneously with opportunities and risks, the archaeologists understood that they could not dig without guidance. Before a single rock was moved, they resorted to modern technology. Instruments capable of penetrating through the ground and revealing what remained hidden without causing damage. Ground-penetrating radar was used to emit pulses into the terrain and record how they returned, revealing differences in density. Resistivity surveys measured how efficiently the soil conducted electrical currents, which can indicate if walls or cavities are hidden below. Magnetometry tracked small variations in the magnetic field that frequently arise where humans built or sculpted in rocky formations. Each of these methods possessed limitations, however. Combined, they offered the archaeologists a way to build an image of what was hidden. Inside a temporary field tent, the results emerged on illuminated screens. Lines and shapes undulated across the monitors. For several researchers, the patterns resembled signals of a heartbeat, pulsing with each movement of the radar. Initially, the readings were conventional. They showed the known drainage channels that the Nabateans had sculpted to protect the Treasury against floods. They also identified natural fissures in the sandstone that were expected. Nothing extraordinary occurred during the initial scans, and part of the team began to question if the scans would only confirm what was already known. But then, something unexpected emerged before them. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a specialist in radar technology from the University of St. Andrews, was monitoring the data when she noticed something that made her call the entire team. On the screens, the anomaly did not just show a rectangular void. There were density patterns that suggested multiple layers of construction. "It is as if someone had built walls within walls," she explained, her voice trembling slightly. "This is not just a closed chamber. It is a chamber designed never to be opened." The data indicated that the builders had used redundant sealing techniques, something never seen before in Petra. 3 distinct layers of stone blocks, interspersed with mortar and compacted debris. The level of effort employed was disproportionate to any known tomb. This was not protection. It was imprisonment. Among the common characteristics was a shape that did not correspond to the rest. It was clearly defined, rectangular and regular in its edges. Differently from the fissures or drains, this element seemed deliberate, as if it had been shaped by human hands. Initially, some members of the team suspected that the equipment was producing a technical error. However, when the same pattern appeared in repeated scans, the room fell into absolute silence. Everyone understood they were observing something distinct. The anomaly was more extensive than anticipated, buried at depths superior to the tourist tunnels, and different from anything previously documented below the Treasury. In the official records, it was catalogued with a neutral denomination, Anomaly C. However, in private conversations, away from formal notes, the archaeologists began to refer to it differently. Around the campfires during the nights, they discussed it as the sealed chamber. The nomenclature carried symbolic weight, suggesting mystery and intention, as if the Nabateans had not only created this space, but had also employed great effort to keep it sealed. The scans revealed edges too straight to be natural, and a void with a shape too perfect to be accidental. An archaeologist later commented, "It appears that someone built this compartment and then desired that no one should ever enter again." Speculations began to proliferate. Some members of the team believed it could be a hidden tomb, perhaps belonging to the elite of Petra. Others considered it could be part of a forgotten water system. According to local rumors, the Nabateans occasionally sealed locations to keep dangerous things contained, such as victims of epidemics, cursed remains, or objects linked to forbidden rituals. None of these theories could be confirmed, but the possibilities made the discovery even more disturbing. The scans revealed enough to prove that something existed there. The only path forward was excavation. However disturbing, the soil below the treasury would not be simple. It would mean peeling away the earth layer by layer, knowing that each step brought them closer to a chamber that the Nabateans possibly desired to remain sealed eternally. Breaking the seal, a descent into the darkness. When the excavation finally started, the atmosphere around the treasury was charged with tension. Everyone recognized that it was not a conventional excavation. Initially, the team used standard tools to remove the upper strata of soil. But when they reached the area near the sealed structure, they altered their approach. Brushes and wooden instruments replaced metal ones, ensuring that no scratch or spark could damage what was hidden below. The site was treated with extreme care. Each action was deliberate, as if they were peeling away the layers of a wound that had remained closed for centuries. The soil was removed in the thinnest layers, sometimes only a few centimeters at a time. Each handful was sifted, photographed, and recorded. Even the tiny fragments of pottery or charcoal were collected for later analysis. According to reports, the team worked in rotating shifts to maintain constant progress without haste. The site was treated like a patient in a surgical procedure, where precision mattered more than speed. The deeper they advanced, the more compact the soil became. Centuries of pressure had made it heavy and dense, forcing the archaeologists to work slowly and with caution. Then the first hint of something intentional emerged. Sculpted steps began to take shape, pointing down toward the darkness. Shortly after, walls of smoothed stone emerged, containing the soil as if the builders had prepared the space to remain sealed for eternity. The masonry shocked the team. It was not coarse or improvised. The blocks were cut with precision and fitted so tightly they allowed no gaps or openings, not even a trickle of air. The chamber had been closed in a manner that suggested permanence. Some archaeologists observed that it seemed less like a common closure and more like a deliberate burial. This raised a disturbing question. Who sealed the chamber and for what reason? One theory is that workers may have been forced to seal it, being fully aware of what was inside. Imagine slaves or low-ranking workers piling the final blocks while screams echoed behind them. Archaeological evidence suggests that the builders worked with extraordinary speed. Tool marks on the stones show hurried and imprecise strikes on the internal layers, completely different from the usual Nabatean mastery. More disturbing still, between the ceiling blocks, the team found fragments of fabric and organic remains that should not be there. Preliminary analyses indicated they were contemporary to the ceiling, not to the bodies inside the chamber. This raises a terrifying possibility. What if the workers who sealed the chamber not only heard screams coming from the interior, but left living people inside? What if part of the horror was not just burying the dead, but burying witnesses who knew too much? The fabric fragments could be evidence that some builders were forced into the chamber before the final sealing, sacrificed not by ritual, but for silence. Another possibility was that the closure was ordered directly by the Nabatean elites, not to honor the dead, but to bury a crime or shameful act they wished to erase. The perfection of the seal suggested fear, not reverence. Whoever closed the chamber desired for the world of the living to forget it. The cameras recorded the moment when the sealed cavity finally widened into an opening. Cold and stale air escaped into the trench. It exhaled the odor of dust that had remained trapped for approximately 2 millennia. An archaeologist said later that it was like breathing the past. Another admitted that moving forward felt wrong, as if they were invading a place that should never have been disturbed. Theories spread quickly. Specialists speculated it could have been a ritual chamber. According to local whispers, the Nabateans occasionally isolated locations not to protect them, but to protect the living from what was inside. Some said the chambers were closed to contain the plague, isolating the source of infection so it could never spread. Others believed that dangerous idols or forbidden texts were hidden underground, sealed to prevent their use in obscure ceremonies. Some even claimed that such spaces were cursed, marked as places where restless spirits of the dead were imprisoned. None of these theories could be proven, but all conveyed a sense of unease. The void under the Treasury was not a simple cavity. It was more extensive, more deliberate, and much more disturbing than anyone anticipated, and as the team prepared to go further, it became evident they were about to discover something terrifying. The tomb in the shadow of the Treasury. As soon as the opening was considered safe, the team entered with powerful lights and cautious movements. The chamber was not a rustic cave formed by nature. It was shaped with precision. Small openings in the walls aligned at regular intervals. In Nabatean tombs, such elements were not decorative. They frequently contained offerings, secondary burials, or symbolic objects. The layout demonstrated that this place had not been improvised. Then came the moment that froze the team. Skeletons began to emerge. The first lay intact on a low stone ledge, its bones still connected in proper order. Skull at the top, spine aligned, arms at the side of the body, and legs extended below. This meant that the burial had never been disturbed. A few meters away, another skeleton remained in the same position. As more light spread through the chamber, the count increased. At least 12 individuals were present. Some were adults, but others were smaller, probably children. None were scattered, none were deposited in haste. They had been positioned carefully, each in a deliberate position. Some were arranged separately in niches, while others were found in pairs, suggesting possible bonds between them. Objects lay beside many of the skeletons. A small bowl was near a person's hand. A flask was near another person's feet. Thin traces of bronze and iron appeared in the soil near the ribs and hips, possibly fragments of jewelry or accessories. One skeleton had a piece of pottery pressed against its ribs, positioned with such precision that it seemed as if the person had held it in their final moments. These were not extravagant funerary goods, yet they were chosen and organized with intention, suggesting that the value of the burial was symbolic, not material. What disturbed most of the archaeologists was the condition of the chamber. Unlike most of the tombs of Petra, which had been looted or damaged by floods, this one was hermetically sealed. The sediment had settled like a lock, preserving everything in place. The air was musty. The walls seemed untouched. For researchers used to fragmented and interrupted data, the preservation seemed strange. Several admitted later that the silence inside the room was disturbing, as if time itself had been paused, and they were invading a story that should never be interrupted. The work slowed its pace. Specialists recorded the exact position of each bone. Conservators stabilized fragile remains, and each object was collected with rigorous labels. The chamber already raised troubling questions, but the team began to suspect that what they had seen so far was only part of the story. Beneath the Treasury, the earth still contained a sealed space that no light had touched for centuries. The locked room, a place of horrifying revelation. When the sealed chamber was finally opened, the silence was overwhelming. The air that escaped was fetid and suffocating. Masks were donned immediately, but even through filters, the odor persisted, a mixture of decomposition, soot, and something acrid that made breathing difficult, seeming unnatural. An archaeologist later said the sensation was like inhaling death itself. The first beam of light revealed blackened walls covered in soot, as if fire had once burned inside the chamber. But what was seen told the most shocking story. Unlike the orderly burials in the previous chamber, these bodies had no dignity. They were piled in a chaotic manner, twisted in unnatural positions, limbs tangled, skulls tilted at strange angles, some face down, others piled on top of one another. The arrangement was not done with care. It was haste, it was fear, it was violence. Dr. James Harrington, a forensic anthropologist with 40 years of experience in sites of mass trauma, was invited to examine the remains. After 3 days analyzing the skeletons, he requested a private meeting with the project leadership. What he shared was never officially documented, but it leaked through team members. Harrington identified trauma patterns that suggested many victims did not die quickly. Defensive fractures on the forearms, indicated attempts at protection. Scratch marks on the stone walls, discovered under magnification, showed that human fingernails had scraped the rock. More shocking, the position of some skeletons suggested they were trying to reach the sealed entrance when they died. Harrington, known for his professional composure, admitted to the team that in decades of documenting human atrocities, he had never seen anything that disturbed him so much. "These people," he said, "died knowing they were intentionally forgotten." The bones revealed the truth of their final moments. Several skeletons featured puncture fractures that could not be explained by natural collapse. Skulls were cracked, ribs were broken, joints were wrenched apart. Some had jaws wide open, frozen in expressions that looked like screams. Among them, one of the most haunting images was the mortal remains of a child wrapped in the arms of an adult. The two had fused through centuries of sediment, trapped eternally in what seemed to be a last desperate embrace. The findings only became stranger. Near a wall, 3 skeletons had been positioned side by side with unusual care. One of them carried traces of fine bronze jewelry and accessories, signs of high status. The other 2 were younger, their bones showing signs of violent death. Some specialists speculated that these 2 may have been killed to serve as companions, sacrificed to accompany the elite figure into the afterlife. The very idea divided the team. Some refused to believe that the people of Petra practiced human sacrifice, while others pointed out that the arrangement was deliberate and could not be ignored. Scattered among the piled bodies were vessels that did not resemble usual Nabatean offerings. Their residues adhered thickly, organic and resistant to easy identification. Initial analyses indicated a rich composition with traces of iron. Rumors quickly spread that it could have been human blood mixed with ashes or bone dust. Others suggested impure ritual ointments made for ceremonies that may have accompanied the killings. The darkest speculation was that these flasks were used for the forced consumption of liquids before death, or scattered over the bodies as part of the preparation for a ritual. The chamber did not have a ceremonial air. It felt desperate. Each detail suggested that people had been forced inside, locked away, and deliberately erased from the world above. Some argued that if it were plague, the closure made sense to protect the living. But if it were massacre or sacrifice, the silence pointed to something darker, a deliberate cover-up. There were no inscriptions, no record, no sign of remembrance, only stone intended to bury the truth. This sharp contrast between the careful burials in the first chamber and the chaos here raised troubling questions. Why were some arranged orderly on stone shelves with bowls, jars, and symbolic objects, while those here were cruelly mixed without dignity? Some specialists believed that those buried carefully may have been chosen sacrifices, organized in a way to give them symbolic importance. The piled bodies, on the other hand, could represent panic or punishment, a group condemned together in haste. A disturbing theory suggested that the chamber may have begun as a tomb for the elite of Petra, but was later reused in a time of crisis, such as plague, invasion, or rebellion, to cover up mass deaths. The contrast created a chilling image, suggesting that the rulers of Petra decided who was worthy of honor and who would be discarded like trash. Their memories sealed in silence under the most celebrated monument of the city. For some, the Treasury itself became the mask, projecting wealth and power to the outside world, while hiding a pit of horror under its foundations. And according to unconfirmed rumors, not all results were released to the public. Some archaeologists claim that agencies and tourism bodies are suppressing certain details to protect Petra's image as a wonder of the world. Sources close to the project, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed that significant tensions emerged between the scientific team and Jordanian authorities. Certain artifacts photographed during the first weeks of excavation never appeared in official reports. One team member mentioned a set of clay tablets with Nabatean inscriptions found in the lower chamber, possibly a record of what happened there. These tablets were quickly removed, and their current whereabouts are unknown. Another researcher reported pressure to modify descriptions in preliminary reports, replacing terms like massacre with collective mortality event and ritual sacrifice with atypical funerary practice. The Jordanian government has neither confirmed nor denied these allegations. Officially, all findings are being processed through appropriate academic channels. But the silence surrounding specific details raises inevitable questions. What else was found in that chamber? And why is there such fear of the world knowing? The horror resided not only in the bones, but in the intention. Someone built this chamber, filled it and sealed it with the clear objective of erasing its memory. Whatever happened inside was never intended to be seen again. And with this revelation, the most iconic monument of Petra became the guardian of its most disturbing secret. Echoes of the darkness, the legacy of the discovery. The sealed chamber under Petra is no longer a rumor. It is fact. What this means, however, is still fiercely debated. Scholars are now preparing careful study programs to ensure that conclusions are based on science rather than fear. The plan is to let the evidence speak for itself. DNA tests may show if the dead were part of the same family, outsiders brought in, or individuals chosen for reasons we still cannot explain. Some believe the results could reveal connections with regions outside Petra, which would suggest migration movements or crises. Others hope the profiles show Nabatean families of long tradition. Any answer would change the way the history of Petra is understood. Isotopic analysis offers another set of clues. It can reveal what people ate and where they lived. If the bones show diets of imported foods, this would suggest high status. If they show only local grains and water, this could mean common people involved in extraordinary events such as famine, disease outbreaks, or sudden conflicts that forced mass burials. According to reports, residue analysis is also planned for the strange containers. The hope is to identify what they once held: wine, incense, medicinal mixtures, or something much more disturbing. Until these results are released, the questions remain open. Even without these answers, the impact of the discovery has already spread. Guides cannot describe the treasury in the same way again. It is no longer just a wonder of architecture. It is also the site of hidden deaths and unanswered fears. According to local residents, some visitors now avoid certain corners of the front courtyard after hearing what was discovered. Authorities are adjusting tourist routes and conservation strategies to balance access with respect for what was found. For archaeologists, the chamber is more than a discovery. It is a warning. Not everything discovered should be treated as a spectacle. Some spaces demand moderation, careful study, and humility. Petra was always admired as a wonder of stone, but now it forces a harder truth. Beneath its beauty lie shadows deliberately locked away. The world at large now needs to ask a bigger question. If Petra kept a secret like this for nearly 2 millennia, what else is hiding under the deserts of Jordan? And what would it mean if these secrets were disturbed? In the months following the discovery, strange reports began to emerge from the local workers involved in the project. 3 members of the excavation team requested transfer before the conclusion of the work, citing personal reasons. One of them later admitted to a journalist that he could no longer sleep without recurring nightmares of being trapped in the dark, hearing scratching on the walls. The site's conservation supervisor developed unexplained anxiety when approaching the treasury, something he had never experienced in 20 years of archaeological work. Psychologists consulted by the project suggested that vicarious trauma, indirectly experiencing the suffering of victims, could explain these reactions. But some team members whispered less rational explanations. Whether psychological trauma or something beyond scientific understanding, one thing was certain. The chamber left scars not only on the bones it kept, but also on the minds of those who disturbed it. Petra had revealed its secret, but the cost of that knowledge was still being calculated. Petra is no longer just the Rose City. It is also a city of sealed horrors, where the dead still whisper from behind stone walls. Petra is no longer just the Rose City. It is also a city of sealed horrors, where the dead still whisper from behind stone walls. The mystery of the chamber remains. Was it a barrier against the plague, a ritual vault, or something even more disturbing? The answer may be buried forever under the desert of Jordan.